So this is part 4 of chapter 7 for arrays with us. So you need to process how to read the content of a file into array with this thing. You've done, if you remember in chapter 7 or 8 in 1436, you have to process reading in an external file. And what you need to do is create an array size of 5. And let's assume that we know the size of this array with this thing. Again, you do a reference array size with this, and then you're going to create file, this is reserve, and this is the name of the text file with this thing. So you're going to input in, that's called input file, and then you write loop, and this is how it loops to the next one with this thing. So input file dot has next, and then your I is less than the number dot length. So this number right here that you're looking at is this number is this size right here. Alright, and that should return you the number, the length integer with it as well. So make sure you close out your file with this thing. When you look at returning an array reference with this thing, when you actually have the return type of the method must be declared as the array type of the thing. So make sure you have, this is a double, and all these has decimals on there, so it's a data type. So all these are arrays that has that same data type, and this is the array that you're returning with this thing. So make sure it matches is what I'm saying. String arrays, same thing for this thing, same data types with different, very similar strings. You could use strings to store things in here. Again, in initialization list, if it's not provided, the new keyword must be used to create the arrays with this thing. So you create an array keywords with this by storing in the new string with it, and that actually stores it in. Now the name variable holds the address of the container. Basically, it's a null. Nothing is in there. So until you store something in there, like you assign this string goes inside this element 0, 1, 2, 3, so on with it. How do you call an array? Well, there's several ways you're calling a string array method. String objects have several methods: to upper, compare, equal, char at. Some of these you probably are familiar with from C++ with this, but very similar concepts that you're going to see with strings that you're going to actually compare with this thing. I'll let you read through a couple of these slides over here. They're pretty self-explanatory, I think, the array as an objects with this thing. So you can actually use the memory address to store in an inventory of the certain array size of 5 with this thing. So each one of these things actually has a descriptor and units that you can actually store in, and how you read into the loops with this thing. I want to spend a little time talking about the search arrays and how you do a bubble search and selection sort in this thing, because this is a crucial pivotal point where you can actually store and sort things with it. The first one I want to talk to you about is a search array. Give me a second here. So this is the search array. Let me talk to you about this one here. This is not your typical array. This, depending on your data types and all that stuff, but this is a pretty, we don't use this on industry. This just takes too long if you did do something like this with it as well. So what are you doing? You're searching an array, call array, and you're passing across a value with this thing. So you int is your declarations, your int, and your elements. Boolean is found. You start with the index of 0, and then this is your initialization before you get into your while loop with this thing. So you go from element 0 until you find it. Basically, that's what this algorithm talks about with it. All right, great if you have less than 100, less than a few hundreds will do. Going through every element is not practical with this thing. So it basically goes through each of the elements. You check to make sure the value that you're finding, if you find it, you basically flip the bit to true. You change that element, and then you update your index, and then you basically return your element when you're done with it, once it's false with this thing. So not a really great way of searching. Next, I want to talk to you the same thing. This next slide talks about the sequential search algorithm, the selection search with this thing. the other one is called a binary search. Like I really like the way how this talks about it lays it out pretty good, the algorithm with this. It requires an array sorted in ascending order. It sorts it for you. All right. So if you can sort it out first and then you search. So start the element in the middle of the array. So it actually sorts it out. If an element is desired value, the search is over. Otherwise, the middle of the element is greater or less than the desired value, and it's greater than the desired value. Search the halfway of the it basically divides half, and search half of it, and then it flips the bits if it finds it. That's all it's doing with this thing. There is a binary search. You can actually look at that code with it. I'm going to talk to you about two-dimensional arrays. What this thing is, this kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet, kind of like. Does that look familiar? So each one of these cells basically has an address. So for example, this is row 0, column 0, and all the way down to row 3, column 3. So this is row 2, column 2. This is row 3, column 0. Okay, so it has an address, is my point. So it gives you the number of rows and columns. Now, where I'm going with this is that in a few more minutes you're going to see that there will be a nesting of for loop. The outer for loop is going to be the row, and the inner for loop is going to determine the number of columns with this thing, is my point. So when you look at the two-dimensional arrays, this is how you actually declare it with it. Now, of course, when you have your rows 3, column, remember now you start with 0, 0 is your first one. Your last one is going to be row 3, column 3, which means that you actually have 4 rows, 4 columns. Just want to let you know. Excuse me. So when you actually process an array, the data for the two-dimensional array, the two subscript, one is for the row, one is for the column. This is how this is laid out here. There is a test question that I ask you to make sure you know the number of, if I say score 2, I want you to know that I have how many columns? 4 columns. I want you to know you have 3, basically 3 rows. Okay, so it's always one less is my point. Okay, so how do you process put in a certain, same thing as how you put in a one-dimensional array. You give it the address, row and column, 2 and 1, and then you assign the value from the right to the left with this thing. So that's how you process that with it. I'll let you read through the PowerPoint slide. It's pretty self-explanatory with this. Same as the corp sales with this, how you process the array with this thing. How you initialize it, how you actually initialize the two-dimensional arrays with this thing. You can process it by putting in. So if you look at this array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can pretty much lay out how this is laid out with this thing. So the number of variable holds the address of the two-dimensional arrays and the int value with this thing. So this can, if you look at the first left and right curly brackets with this thing, doesn't it, this first nested set 1, 2, and 3 is nested, and there's a curly brackets, this and a comma, and the next curly brackets is 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, and 9. So it depicts the rows and columns that you have with this thing as well. Okay, so I think it's pretty cut and dry. I think it's pretty self-explanatory with this thing. The length of a row, the two-dimensional rows are arrays of one-dimensional arrays with this. Two-dimensional arrays are arrays of one-dimensional arrays. The length field of array gives the number of rows of the array. Each row has the length constant, tells how many columns is in that row. Each row has the number of columns. So when you process this, there is when you look at the length of the row with this thing, so you can give it the length of this row with this thing.